Ahead on Straight Talk, a re-election campaign and a mission.
I am calling on everyone to be off the couch.
Oregon Senator Jeff Merkley announces he'll seek a fourth term in Congress.
We've seen it through the open disregard of the laws affecting the executive branch.
We sit down with Oregon's longtime senator to talk about his priorities as the Senate wraps up its session, what he says is at stake for Democrats heading into next year's midterms.
We have to use every single tool, no business as usual.
Plus, his take on how federal spending cuts could impact Oregon families and how the U.S. should respond to the growing humanitarian crisis in Gaza.
They're needing nutrition that they're not getting. The babies are not getting formula and vaccines.
All that and more right now on Straight Talk. Hello and welcome to Straight Talk. I'm Stephanie Domerat. Now this week, our guest is longtime U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley, a Democrat who has represented Oregon in the Senate since 2009. We're talking about the state of Congress, the upcoming midterms, global conflicts, and what recent federal decisions mean for families here in Oregon. Senator Merkley, thank you so much for being with us today.
Stephanie, it's great to be with you.
And I want to, before we get started, a note to our viewers. I want to timestamp this interview because we are taping this on Wednesday afternoon, and things, of course, always change from day to day in the Senate. So first, Senator Merkley, let's begin with your plans. You recently announced you will be running for re-election in 2026. So what contributed to that decision?
Well, Mary and I, my wife Mary and I, we really wrestled with this because it's a 6-year commitment. And there's still a year and a half left in this term. And we asked ourselves, what is the best path forward for our state and for our country? And we felt at this moment, when Trump is carrying out an authoritarian strongman takeover of our government, damaging the separation of powers and the checks and balances of our Constitution, that we had to be fully in the fight. So Mary and I made the decision together, and I am running for re-election.
So Republicans, of course, control both chambers of Congress and the White House right now. How are Democrats as a whole approaching the midterms next year and trying to reach their base again?
Well, certainly I'm excited about the basic energy I'm seeing. Last year in my town halls, I do an open town hall in every county in Oregon each year. I had about 3,500 people come in 2024, but this year I had over 15,000. So there's a tremendous amount of energy. And yes, people were coming and concerned about rising prices or trade policy that was going to affect them, or healthcare programs, particularly concern over what the diminishment of those programs was going to be under Trump's agenda. But I can tell you that the great majority who are coming were saying we are very concerned about the basic architecture of our Constitution. Are we going to be able to preserve government by and for the people and prevent an authoritarian government by and for the powerful? And I heard them loud and clear, and I'm taking that message right here to D.C.
So how would you describe the state of the Democratic Party right now?
Well, I would say that when we don't have a president, you have many, many voices. And people say, don't the Democrats have a coherent plan? And the answer is no, it doesn't work like that. I think Will Rogers said he was not a member of any organized party. He was a Democrat. And that's kind of the situation we're in, where if you have 10 of us in a room, you're going to get 10 visions. But I tell you, there is a core to that vision, and that is the foundations for family, healthcare, housing, education, and investments that create good paying jobs, because there's no government program that substitutes for a good paying job, and to fight for equality of opportunity and to take on climate change. So that's kind of the core. We have different versions of exactly what should be done and how to talk about it. But it's not enough to say, not Trump. You need to have a vision taking us forward. I want to see improvements to our health care, not the huge degradation that just happened in the passage of the Republicans' big, ugly betrayal bill that's going to cut 15 million people out of Medicaid, including that's 150,000 to 200,000 Oregonians who will lose the Oregon Health Plan over the next 3 years. That is a direct assault on the quality of life, the exact sort of thing that what we are fighting against.
So you mentioned it a little bit. There are a lot of voices in the Democratic Party. We've seen changes in the Republican Party. We've seen changes in the Democratic Party. I want to ask you, are there internal divisions that are affecting the legislative agenda right now?
Well,
Within the
Must say
party.
there's always divisions. When
Yeah.
you have a group together coming from different parts of the countries, the states look different in different parts of the different regions of the nation. But I would say that core I was describing is pretty consistent in terms of the foundations for families to thrive. Because here's what we've been seeing from President Trump. We have been seeing a vision that is families lose and billionaires win. And we've called it a betrayal because he campaigned on helping families, but you saw who was lined up behind him during the inauguration, a set of billionaires. And the entire agenda that he put through under this, what he called the one big beautiful bill and what we refer to as the big ugly betrayal, that bill was all about cutting nutrition programs to fund tax breaks for billionaires, cutting health care for millions of Americans to fund tax breaks for billionaires. So it was families lose, billionaires win. And the vision we're fighting for, it's a better vision. It's families thrive, and billionaires, they pay their fair share.
So a major concern for many Oregonians is the rising cost of living. You mentioned it when you were speaking about your town halls recently: housing, groceries, healthcare, inflation. What steps do you believe the federal government should take that could offer real relief right now?
Let me give a couple examples. On housing, I'm proposing that we kick the hedge funds out of the single-family housing market. They are buying up a huge amount of the homes in America. If you think about the economic pie in America, and there is a slice that has been home ownership, meant equity for middle-class families, blue-collar kids like myself, you could buy a home. Well, no longer. I still live in a blue-collar community, and there's no expectation that children will be able to buy a home. And they're in competition with billionaire hedge funds. And so I've talked about this in every part of the state, and it's popular among blue counties and red counties and everything in between, because people think it's wrong that the billionaires are taking that slice that went to middle-class America in home equity, home ownership, and taking it away. Plus, once they buy the homes, they jack up the rents, so everybody who's renting, well, they're getting pressed to the wall as well. So that's one example. A second example is Americans should never have to pay more for a drug than paid by other developed countries. But here's the thing, we should actually get the best price. We should get the best price because we invest more in the research and development for those drugs than the citizens of any other developed country. So therefore, we should get the best price. But like just yesterday, I was talking to somebody who was traveling overseas, and they said they are buying a drug that they need for their illness in that country overseas because it is 10 times cheaper in that country because that country negotiated the price. So those are examples of fundamentals where Americans are getting ripped off because of government buying for the powerful rather than buying for the people.
Let's talk more about policy as you're starting to get into that. So President Trump's tariffs. His administration argues that higher tariffs will encourage domestic manufacturing, boost American jobs. What have you heard from constituents about the impacts of these?
That it's chaos, and no one's going to make an investment in an American factory when you're in the middle of chaos. If I do believe that when we're competing with low-wage countries like China, well, then there's an argument for a tariff so that we have a chance to have more factories, more jobs here in the United States of America. But you won't get those investments if you're changing the tariff policy every other day, and that's where we've been at. And as I traveled in my town halls, I heard from the agricultural community huge anxiety, not just about tariffs, but about what are the retaliatory tariffs going to be. So everyone's on their edge of their seat. They're not sure what plant to crop, or what plant to put out and grow. It's really disturbing. I mean, one day you have a company that might benefit from a steel tariff, but you got another company that imports key parts from overseas that will be affected in a negative way, and yet they're thinking about those tariffs might change a few months from now. So do we order parts? Do we not order parts? So on and so forth. So that chaos is hurting. We are looking at the possibility of Trumpflation, from prices going up, because realize tariffs really operate like a national sales tax. They're not paid by the importers or the exporters. They're paid for by Americans when we buy products. So people are very worried about Trumpflation, and they're also worried about the possibility of a Trump slump, because when there's this sort of chaos and therefore lack of investment decisions, it can lead to a downturn in the economy.
So you mentioned a little bit there at the start of that answer that you do support the idea that there should be more manufacturing jobs here, or we should be relying more on American-made products. So you agree with the sentiment of what the goal is with these tariffs?
Yes, I do. If we turn the clock back, we decided to open our market to China because we wanted to separate China from Russia. But what that produced was a massive flight of American manufacturing overseas. And it makes sense because if you can build something in China where the wages are very low, where the environmental rules are not enforced, it's going to be cheaper to make it there. Suddenly that factory that employed middle-class Americans here is gone. It's gone overseas. And that has happened on a massive scale. And it's something people are frustrated about, losing those middle-class jobs. And rightly so, because there is no government program as good as a good job when it comes to a foundation for a family.
I want to move on to some notes from the Treasury Department about these tariffs now, and reporting that there could be a rise in income for the federal government. So this week, Senator Josh Hawley proposed a new bill that would refund tariffs collected under Trump's trade policies in the form of a tax credit for families, similar to pandemic-era stimulus checks. What was your reaction to that idea?
Well, I hadn't heard about it till you mentioned it now. We are likely to see a huge decrease in revenue as a result of the bill that the Republicans just passed, because they did massive tax breaks for basically the richest Americans. In addition to savaging Medicaid, that is the Oregon Health Plan in our state, in addition to savaging nutrition programs, it is going to create probably about a $3.5 trillion additional debt over the next 10 years, and over $30 trillion in additional debt over the next 30 years. So there's going to be a massive drop in revenue. So yes, a little bit more money from tariffs, but a huge drop in revenue because of all of the loopholes created for the richest Americans.
Let's speak more about economic platform under Trump. So one of his stated goals was to make government more efficient through something called the Department of Government Efficiency, as we've seen. Do you agree with the premise that government needs to be more efficient?
There are certainly more efficiencies to be found. At a previous point in time, I was working for the Secretary of Defense under the Reagan administration. That's a long time ago. But I spent one 3-month assignment in the budget cycle where we identified all sorts of programs that had no particular meaning and should be shut down. They were just there because of some lobbyists, some admiral who had become a lobbyist or general become a lobbyist, and there was a huge kind of inside network, or somebody on Capitol Hill wanted those jobs in their home district even though the military didn't want that program. There were huge efficiencies to be found, but it was a very careful scrutiny of every single program to say, is it needed? Is it not needed? Why? Here's a budget decision memo. Okay, here's a recommendation. And I wrote those budget decision memos. That's careful work, cutting out the things that should be cut out, as opposed to like the savage weekend effort of Elon Musk to feed the Assistance and International Development Agency into the wood chipper, as he put it. A decision over a weekend that has now increased deaths overseas by over 200,000 people because Elon Musk and Marco Rubio decided over a weekend to cancel, well, over 500 contracts without any congressional authorization to do so. So not only was it an egregious decision in terms of our relationships overseas and our soft power overseas, but it was an egregious decision in human suffering, and it was also a violation of law and a violation of the Constitution. So you have to do efficiency right, in a very thorough and thoughtful fashion, not in a chaotic fashion that hurts jobs, hurts the success of Americans, or otherwise makes things worse instead of better.
So a common conservative concern, though, is waste or fraud is happening in federal programs like COVID relief or like Medicaid, for example. So what oversight or reforms do you support that would make sure that taxpayer money is being spent responsibly?
No, I'm thinking back to COVID, where we stood up programs very quickly to save the economy from a complete Great Depression style crash. And there were a lot of false applications. that were fabricated, fraudulent, if you will, for some of those programs. And it took a while for the government to stand up teams to vet those applications effectively. We needed to do it faster. We were operating, that is, the federal government was operating very fast to prevent a complete catastrophic economic disaster during a very unique and time that we hadn't experienced before. But the programs to stop fraud weren't stood up fast enough. Now, in some cases, Trump has talked, for example, about massive fraud in Medicaid. That is just not, it's just not true. He's talked about people 300 years old on Medicaid. No, that doesn't exist. Or on Medicare, that doesn't exist. And so we have to realize there will always be areas where we can improve. But if the fraud rate is down around 1%, well, yes, we want to squeeze it down even further, but it is not the catastrophic fraud that Trump uses as a political speech maker point.
We're going to take a short break here on Straight Talk, and when we come back, we'll continue our conversation with U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. Stay with us. And welcome back to Straight Talk. We are continuing our conversation with U.S. Senator Jeff Merkley. And Senator Merkley, thank you again for joining us today, all the way from D.C.
You bet.
A note to viewers, again, we are taping this interview on Wednesday afternoon. Things can change, so we just want to let you know that timestamp. Let's dive back into this, Senator. So we know that the Trump administration is looking at rolling back environmental rules under the EPA and other climate-related laws. Many Republican voters do feel that environmental regulations have gone too far and have hurt industries like farming, logging, energy. How do you respond to those constituents who are in favor of pulling back some regulations?
Well, I always ask people to give me specific stories about what they're talking about. We have found, for example, on environmental permits, often the problem isn't the structure of the permit, it's the fact that EPA was understaffed and backlogged. And so the solution to that isn't to get rid of an environmental review, it's to have enough staff at EPA to get the review out timely fashion.
So if someone does have these concerns, do you recommend they reach out to you specifically about, how to work around that?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. And as the Democrat who is leading the Interior Committee, which deals with funding for the EPA, I'm in a position to really advocate for changes to increase the efficiency. And if there's something going on that is duplicative or it's an unreasonable standard, I want to fix that because we want that system to work well for clean air and clean water. We don't want it to hurt the economy.
Let's turn now to the war in Gaza. So this week, a bipartisan group of 44 senators signed a letter urging Secretary of State Marco Rubio to expand humanitarian aid in the region. Can you walk us through your decision-making around that and what you believe is the most effective path forward to address this humanitarian crisis we're seeing?
Back in January of 2024, I met with doctors who had just left Gaza, and they said, we can set the broken bones, but our patients aren't healing because they don't have enough nutrition, enough food. So that was 19 months ago. So the following month, in February of 2024, I got a group of senators together and we proposed Operation Gaza Relief, that the United States, if Netanyahu government would not provide sufficient food, we need to do a massive sea lift of food so it could be distributed. We needed to get our hospital ships off the coast to help address many of the medical needs because we, the United States of America, should not be complicit in a strategy of starving people. But that strategy has continued, and it's gotten worse ever since. Why I'm taking the position that we should not send another dollar or another bomb to the Netanyahu government until every child and every mother has sufficient nutrition.
Well, let's talk now more about the Republican Party's opinions and what we're seeing from people and for the war in Gaza. We're seeing really a shift that seems to be happening in Congress right now as far as hearing from those in the Republican Party. Do you see a shift when it comes to supporting Gaza and U.S. policy in the region?
Yes, I do. About a month ago, I did a speech on the floor bringing together all of the information from all of the experts on international aid and experts on Gaza, laying out the severe malnutrition from this strategy of depriving food. And nobody was using the word starvation. And so I was nervous about doing that presentation, I consulted with experts over and over to make sure everything I said was accurate. I must say that the international press has been slow to really capture the level of the devastation, but now they have. Now you hear in report after report, whether it's on public radio or any of the major networks or any major newspapers, they're all conveying the level of the tragedy. Thousands of children acutely malnourished, children who are dying of starvation, mothers who have no chance of breastfeeding their children because of the malnutrition. They have no breast milk, and the list goes on. The deliberate strategy of starving people in Gaza breaks every religious code. It breaks every moral code. And America, by failing as the major partner to the Netanyahu government, by failing to get Netanyahu to supply nutrition and to supply medical supplies, and by failing to do it ourselves, we are complicit in this tragedy. And finally, America is waking up to understanding the level of the disaster and the urgency of trying to do everything we can to remedy it. But let's not forget, those malnourished children, they are going to carry damage for the rest of their life if they survive.
I want to switch gears now. We're taping this, of course, Wednesday afternoon, but you did introduce the Epstein Files Transparency Act this week to direct the U.S. Department of Justice to release all files relating to the investigation of Jeffrey Epstein. Why did you feel this was necessary to introduce right now, and what are you hoping to accomplish? We only have a few minutes left.
Well, I always feel that we have to bring truth to power, and anyone who is involved in raping underage girls should be held accountable. Let the chips fall where they may. I'm sick and tired of hearing that the Justice Department refuses to release details. They should have been released under President Obama. They should be released under President Trump. And if there are powerful people who are involved in this, who are hiding behind the government blocking the release, well, I say hold them accountable. Let's get full transparency.
Now, some Democrats have warned that this renewed attention to the Epstein is distracting from larger policy issues like Trump's big bill and the impacts of that. Do you share that concern at all?
No, I've always been concerned when powerful people get off the hook. The first political act I had was writing a letter to a newspaper in Portland saying that what's this with Spiro Agnew being convicted of taking $100,000 in bribes and his penalty is only $10,000. Like, gets 90%, he gets to keep 90% of his ill-gotten proceeds. What kind of mess? Where's the equal justice under law in that? Equal justice law, we struggle towards it, but the powerful always seem to get off the hook. I'm always for providing equal accountability for the powerful person versus the ordinary American.
One final question. We only have 30 seconds here, but you have been in the Senate for more than 15 years. I want to ask you, how has partisanship changed during that time, and are there still meaningful opportunities for bipartisanship today?
Well, there are such opportunities. I have partnered with virtually every Republican who serves here, every conservative Republican, and just today I was working very hard to get a bill out of committee that I was partnering with Ted Cruz of Texas. And many people say, how did that happen? Well, we both had a concern over a growing national surveillance system using facial recognition. So I'm going to keep partnering with colleagues across the aisle. But to your question, yes, absolutely, the partisanship is worse. Different cable television that is dominant in rural America versus urban America means people don't just have different opinions, they start with different facts. And that means they're further apart, and often what they hear on some of those channels is demonizing the other side rather than understanding the differences between perspectives that might grow from living in an urban area versus a rural area.
Senator Jeff Merkley, thank you so much for your time today. I'm so sorry I have to cut you off. We really appreciate you. Thank you so much for your time. And be sure to join us next week here on Straight Talk, where we will discuss recent CDC data showing the national birth rate hitting an all-time low. We'll hear from a practicing fertility doctor as well as a population expert to break all that down. We'll see you next week.